Now may I request M. Bilal Sahab to kindly address the audience. M. Bilal Sahab, as you all know, has been introduced. He was the chairman and managing director of HPCL and is currently chairman of EAC, Environmental Appraisal Committee of MOEF.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Respected Mr. Moskar, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Dr. Sen Gupta, Mr. Hazarika, distinguished invitees, delegates, Mr. Gupta, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I must say it is a great privilege for me to be here with you today and to share the dais with such eminent personalities, especially in the field of environmental protection and laying down national standards. I think this workshop on current environmental standards and guidelines in the oil and gas sector is indeed a very timely one, because as Dr. Sen Gupta had mentioned and as Mr. Hazarika also had alluded to, that oil and gas is the key to our national development, since it is the vital source of energy. And when we talk about energy security, for example, one of the aspects of energy security, that is the transportation part, the transportation aspect, is in spite of all the talk about renewables and biofuels and everything else, I think we can imagine a scene if oil and gas is not there. The whole nation can come to a real standstill. So I think we have been growing in the past based on oil and gas, and we will continue to rely on oil and gas and be consuming increasing quantities as we pursue our goal of 9 or 10% or even higher GDP in this country. And therefore, when we are growing at this tremendous rate, there is a need also to balance the growth with the protection of the environment, because as Mr. Hazarika has very rightly said, that this industry has a great potential to impact the environment. And I would go on to add that in this industry, when we talk about oil and gas, the environmental issues and the safety issues are very closely intertwined. They are very closely interlinked. And therefore, what happens in some incidents like the BP incident and some other incidents, I think has a great impact on the environment. So we should look at it in a holistic kind of a manner when we talk about the oil and gas industry at least, and maybe some other industries also. I think when we want to study the environmental issues in any manufacturing, and especially a continuous processing industry like a refinery, we can get better insights into the environmental issues and concerns if we have some idea about the processes and operations of that industry. Now, for an audience like this, I don't think I need to elaborate on this aspect to a very large extent, being such a learned audience here today. But if I don't, then I'll be deviating from an acceptable sequence, and I think I will only say that if we look at the oil and gas sector, of course, the upstream is there for producing the oil and gas and for bringing it out from the ground, wherever it is, onshore or offshore. And today we are going into more and more hostile and challenging environments in that. And in the refining sector, the purpose of a refinery is that once this crude oil has come out, we have to convert it into what we call as marketable, acceptable products for the market, which is a fairly simple task, which is carried out in a series of plants or any combination of these plants. And these plants can be involving processes like distillation, which includes even desalting of the crude, which is important from the environmental standpoint, in catalytic cracking or hydrocracking or thermal cracking or waste breaking or coking and reforming, alkylation. You have various processes, hydrodesulfurization is another one. And these processes in a refinery are supported by what we call as auxiliary systems and processes, which includes utilities and hydrogen producing facilities, tankages, flare system, fuel system, and rail and road loading facilities, product dispatch, pumping facilities, slops handling systems, product blending systems, and so on. This is roughly what happens in a refinery. And when we talk about crude oils, what are these? These are basically complex hydrocarbon mixtures in which, on an average, if you look at crude oils, there are crude oils which are widely different in properties, incidentally, from one field to another and one region to another. You can have great differences in the quality of crude oils that you process in refineries. But on an average, a crude oil contains about 84% carbon and about 14% hydrogen. And sulfur, which is the other impurity in crude oil, can vary from a low of less than 5.5% to more than 5%. So you can have very low sulfur crudes and you can have very high sulfur crudes and a range in between that. And then there is the other small impurities like nitrogen and water-soluble metals and some inorganic salts, which would be generally less than 1%. Both the processing configuration as well as the type of crude oil that you process in a refinery have a direct impact on the environment and what happens in the emissions and the effluents and other aspects. Now, what are the principal environmental impact, let's say, of refineries? And I'll focus my attention on refineries because these are major part of the oil and gas chain. One of the major emissions is the sulfur dioxide emission and other sulfur compounds, which generally comes out from the furnaces and the boilers, the huge big furnaces and boilers that we have in refineries. There are oxides of nitrogen in the stack emissions. There are particulates. Of course, there is CO2 when you are burning fossil fuel. And there are then again fugitive emissions and volatile organic compounds. And there are some odor-carrying materials also which you have in the refinery. These are the major kind of air emissions. On the effluent, you have, of course, the oil which goes out, then you have phenols, and sometimes if you have catalytic cracking, you have cyanides also present in the effluent, and you have a high BOD normally in all the effluents. By today's standards, the first few refineries which came up in the country in the early 50s, in fact, the first refinery was a very old refinery which Dr. Sengupta again alluded to, and that is the mini refinery which we have in Digboy in Assam, which is, I think, the third oldest refinery in the world, and it is still operating. It's creditable that it is still operating and meeting the environmental norms. But the other refineries which came up after that were in the early 50s first, and which were in a way ushering in the industrial era in the country. Prior to this, I don't think there was any major industry of any kind of continuous process nature. And from those days standards, these refineries were fairly good size. And if I tell you the size, probably you will laugh, because there was 1.5 million ton capacity and 2 million ton capacity, and again a 1.5 million ton capacity. So I think totally the total capacity was something like 5 million tons. And these were set up by multinational companies, Shell, Exxon and Caltex. All of them were on the coast in Mumbai. Two of them were in Mumbai and one in Visakhapatnam. One of the key objectives of the multinational companies when they were setting up these coastal refineries was they had the crude oil field concessions in the Middle East, which was given to them by the rulers of the various Middle East countries. And from these concessions they were producing crude oil, and they wanted to have assured markets for these crude oils. So there's a place that the crude oil can be easily sent to. And India was seen as a developing destination. So that was one of the prime reasons why they looked at these refineries, not so much as an investment by itself, but as a destination for the crude oil. And since they were getting the Middle East crude oil from there. Most of this crude oil was high to very high sulfur kind of crude oil. So we had all the three refineries processing high sulfur crudes, and there was, of course, in those days very little environmental awareness and consciousness. So there wasn't any desulfurization or sulfur recovery kind of facility or any other kind of such facility. So the impact on the environment must have been fairly significant, because in the absence of any kind of sulfur reduction or any other kind of facility. So with the only saving grace being that the refinery sizes were small, and Mumbai and Vishak in those days was not as crowded or as surrounded by industries and population as it is today. I am told, Dr. Garg is here, he can bear me out, but I think that in Chembur, where the two refineries of BPCL and HPCL, which have been the post-nationalization companies for Shell and Exxon, the population is in excess of 25 lakhs. That was a figure some years back which I was told. So if you have a huge population like that and a number of industries like a big fertilizer plant, a chemical complex, and a huge Tata power plant, and a nuclear complex around that. So you can understand the kind of constraints that one has in that area, and the kind of environment that one is operating in. And therefore, it is all the more necessary to set very high standards when you are operating in such difficult circumstances. And that is the reason that we need to be talking about this subject. Now, though after this 1950s, the country was growing and demand for petroleum products was there. So again in the 60s, there were again two refineries on the coast, which were set up with foreign collaboration this time, not exactly owned by foreign owners, but with foreign collaboration in today's Chennai and Kochi. And what was also very significant is that in the 60s, we set up our own indigenous company, the Indian Oil Company, and which has grown to become a giant today, which started setting up mostly inland refineries as against coastal refineries. Most of the refineries of Indian Oil were based on the indigenous crude that we had in Assam and in Gujarat, and they were built to process those crude oils. So these crude oils, incidentally, one of the boons that we have from the Almighty is that our own crude oil is a low sulfur crude oil, predominantly a low sulfur crude oil. So we had the advantage of processing low sulfur crude oil in these refineries, most of it, and also the giant discovery of the Bombay High field in the early 70s, in 74 I think, and 76 we were the first to process that. That gave us a big boon from the environmental performance angle also. Besides the fact that because of the Bombay High, it spurred the expansion, it encouraged the expansion and setting up of more facilities in the existing refineries. All the refineries had developed plans for additional processing within the refinery areas. And what was a 5.5 or 5 million ton capacity between the three refineries of erstwhile Shell and Exxon and Caltex, today is processing something like 30 million tons. So it's been a very a huge quantum jump in processing capacity, not only in the crude when you talk about refining capacity, you talk primarily about the distillation unit capacity. When we say it's a 30 million ton refinery, it refers to the 30 million tons of crude oil that can be processed, which is processed in the distillation unit. But in addition to distillation, you have the other processes which I mentioned earlier, which is the thermal cracking or the hydrocracking or the catalytic cracking or coking or whatever. And these refineries which were set up in the 50s and 60s did not have adequate secondary processing, as they are called, secondary processing facilities. And it was necessary to set up these also when you are expanding. Secondly, without doubt, there was a need to increase the efficiency and also to improve the environmental performance. So various retrofits were also done in these refineries. But the basic point was that within the land area which was there, if you look back today, it sounds ridiculous to have a 12 million or a 16 million ton refinery operating in a 350 acre plot with all the storages and an LPG plant and dispatch facilities, pumping facilities, everything else in a 350 or 400 acre plant. Today you would go for at least a 2,000 acre plot for a refinery of that size, at least. I'm told my friends from Reliance are here, I think their land size is at perhaps 10,000 acres if I'm not mistaken, or something like that, or maybe 5,000 acres. So, what I'm trying to say is that though we have expanded the refining capacity, we have done it under severe constraints, and today the operation is also severely constrained by the land which is available. In addition to that, there was also the need for setting up the fuel quality upgradation facilities for producing higher quality fuel, whether it is benzene reduction in gasoline to less than 1%, since benzene is carcinogenic, and sulfur reduction in diesel or petrol, or the distillation endpoint correction. All those facilities were also put up, which required then again more hydrogen and more other facilities, cooling water, etc., etc. So the whole it has been a challenging environment to work with this constraint, and yet I think we have done a fairly good job on that. The good thing was that along with this development, we had started setting our own standards, the Air Act, the Air Quality Act, and the Water, and then finally the EPA, and this kept on giving us the guidelines and the direction in which one needs to move. So we had set up first there was no effluent treatment, for example, in many of the coastal refineries. So we had set up in those days the Minas, which was a new plant. It was called the Minas to meet the minimum national standards. And we had set up that to segregate the process effluent which was not segregated and treat it, and then finally today it is a zero effluent refinery. Set up other facilities like the CO boiler, the cogeneration based power and steam facilities, and many of the equipment for fugitive emission reduction and so on. The sulfur recovery unit was another unit, hydrodesulfurization facilities and things like that. But the one thing which has led to SO2 reduction in a significant way has been the processing of the Bombay High crude, which was significantly lower in sulfur, as I said, than the Middle East crudes. And that was, I think, a God-given thing. It wasn't something that the refineries would have planned for. But this is what allowed the continued operation at low SO2 emissions, and also at the effluent quality also was better. Then after the 70s, I think the last refinery which came up in the 70s was the Mathura refinery, there was a lull in refinery activity, in new refinery activity. 80s did not see any refinery, though we kept on talking about Bangalore and other things. But 90s was a different ball game altogether. The refineries which came up in the 90s, starting with the Mangalore refinery and then the private sector refinery at Vadina, they were a class apart from whatever we had been doing in the past. They were very modern refineries with modern technology, and they had incorporated all the facilities for starting with the green belt to emission control, effluent treatment, recycle, everything else. I think they are world-class refineries, and there's something which can be very different from what we had seen in the past. So that's a watershed time. I think from 90s we have embarked on a different kind of a scenario as far as refinery processing is concerned, and there are two more refineries in the pipeline which are likely to be commissioned this year and sometime in the middle of next year in Madhya Pradesh and Punjab, and maybe two more refineries in the private sector thereafter. Hopefully these refineries will meet the best of standards that have been set in our country and perhaps exceed those. The net result of all this kind of development which we have been seeing over the number of years is that we are going to have about 20 odd refineries in the country, which will differ enormously in terms of their size and capacity and throughput or whatever you call it. They will differ in the types of crude oils that you can process. The Reliance refinery has got a very high capability, a very high complexity as they call it in technical language, to process the heaviest of crudes and yet deliver a very high distillate yield. Of course, the age of refineries is different. That makes a difference in the environmental performance. And the location where they are located, at how much land area they have, and whether they are on the coast or inland, all these things have a impact on how the refinery performs. We can say that the pre-80s refineries and the post-90s, the difference is the same like what we used to have between a Fiat Ambassador vehicle and today's, you get the BMWs or Mercedes, and that's the kind of difference that we have. But I think in talking about refineries, we should recognize that the bulk of the refineries, other than these new refineries, have one thing in common, that I think even the Mangalore refinery to some extent has, that they were established when environmental concerns had not yet become a major issue, and government, public or industry or anybody else, environmental concerns from these were not very top of the kind of priority in the list. Although it had been evolving. In fact, I remember when we in the 60s, Shell used to have a small cell called the technical audit under the technical department. The technical audit used to look at energy efficiency and how much you produced of a product and what is the loss of, there's a percentage of loss when you process refineries, so that loss should be within control, and that was the kind of thing, and also look at the effluent, and are we losing a lot of oil in the effluent and things like that. But I think sometime in the 80s, this was redesignated as an energy efficiency and environmental pollution control department. So there was a different emphasis, and it was significantly, the demanding was significantly increased, and people had been given some kind of training and sensitization in that area. One of the things I think that in my experience in refineries that we found was that we are good in meeting the standards which are set by CPCB or by the Environment Ministry or the State Pollution Control Boards, and for that whatever has to be put, we do that. But many times I think it is necessary for the top managements of refineries and facilities to themselves have the confidence that everything else is going on the ground level as per what it is supposed to happen. Many times what is felt is that we have installed and we are running beautifully. The data which is fed to the top management is sometimes skewed, and it does not reflect, or it is sometimes masked. So there has to be a system which promotes transparency, and once you promote transparency in organizations, especially on this matter or any other matter, I think you enhance the performance by a significant factor. So one thing I remember we had done was that we had installed these continuous stack monitors and continuous ambient air monitoring stations. And every time that we took a round and went to one corner of the refinery to see what is the ambient air quality here, we found that the instrument is out of order, sir, or something else had happened last week, we wanted this part, this is not there. The answer was far from satisfactory. So what we had done was that we will install electronic boards at all sides of the refinery and at the gate, which will display these readings on a continuous basis, taking the readings from the ambient monitoring station. So every time we entered the refinery or passed by the boundary of the refinery, we could see, the public could see, everybody could see what is the reading, and if it is not available or if it is a suspect reading, we can take immediate action. So I think this putting instrumentation and getting the value out of instrumentation is something that managements must focus on. And I think that is that more and more transparency in this area. I think I read somewhere that NTPC is putting some stations which will give reading directly to CPCB or to some body, new technologies, etc. that we have done. I think one of the key driving forces in this has been the evolving new standards that have come from CPCB or from Environment Ministry by various acts or from even the state pollution control boards. And I think once the target is set by these, it becomes very clear to the operating facility, to the refinery, what needs to be done. Otherwise, I have seen endless arguments within companies where one group is saying that let us, go put more facilities to reduce the pollution. The other group saying that where is the need? There isn't any standard which says so. So why do you want to spend this money? And it's not your money; it's public money. So let's think about it. Let's not just go on spending money on things which are not going to give returns. So I think if we want to improve the environmental performance, it's very essential that we have these guidelines which tell us what are the minimum acceptable levels that would be required for any facility and what needs to be done. And I think we have been doing good work in that, but there are certain things in which perhaps we can do some more work, especially in oil, in the oil sector. For example, in refineries, though we have that kind of control system for spillages and things like that, but I think there are instances when oil can enter the ground in refineries. We have, for example, if you have wrong or inadequate sampling from products or from crude oil and you let the thing flow down, it can go into the ground. You can have water draining from tanks. Water is present in all the tanks in the refineries at the bottom level. So you have to drain it out and recover the water and treat it and then recover it. If you allow it to spill or there are leakages in the underground oily water spheres which are taking this effluent, that happens very frequently. Under the ground, nobody knows what is happening. The pipes are flowing the oily water or the oil, and if there is a leak, it is detected very late. So if there are those kind of leaks, or there are accidental spills also, many times it happens that tank has overflown, and we saw one incident of a major disaster because of tank overflowing and material coming out. Therefore, more emphasis on this aspect, I think, by way of setting down what are the minimum facilities required in these installations, I think that will go a long way. And another thing I want to mention is that while we talk about environment in these, it's very essential to have an effective corrosion control system in refineries and oil installations, because corrosion is a major source of leakages and spillages out of hydrocarbons. And I remember once seeing a crude oil tank, a huge crude oil tank, which I think stored 14,000 tons of crude oil. Suddenly the bottom and the shell gave way, and huge amounts of crude oil just uncontrollably was coming out, and something had to be done to restrict this crude oil from flowing all over the place and from becoming a major accident hazard. These kind of failures, and how do you, even otherwise there can be tank bottoms, tanks leaking into the bottom, so there has to be some way to prevent that. And I think this monitoring of the ground soil and groundwater in refineries can be a new area in which more attention can be focused. In a number of cases, I think relatively minor modifications can result in a big saving in waste. And most of the people know this, but I think refineries have to consider things like closed loop sampling when they do sampling, or running the mixers on the crude oil tanks so that the sludge is another major hazard. Right, okay. I'm just concluding. In the refineries and so on. I would say I think I've been asked to stop, so I'll stop, but I'll just say one more point, that there is a need, I think, in all the oil companies that I know of, to sensitize people on the environmental and pollution issues and operation. Though they are aware, but the importance of that and how much value they should place on that, I think needs to be sensitized. And for that, I think organizations like the one which is conducting this workshop, or maybe other organizations, can set up a research or a teaching kind of agenda which can periodically upgrade the knowledge and have interactive kind of sessions with technical personnel from the oil and gas sector. I think with this, let me conclude that by saying that we have traveled a long way in setting up new environmental standards and performance in the Indian oil and gas sector, but we still have a large uncovered territory, and in Robert Frost's word, I think I can say that we have promises to keep and miles to go before we sleep. Thank you, and wish you all the best.